Before we wrote laws, before we built cities or temples, we told stories. Stories of gods torn apart, of worlds born in fire, of descents into shadow, and returns. These weren't fairy tales, they were maps. And somehow, even now, in a world of algorithms and AI, those old stories still flicker underneath. This is the place where thought begins. Welcome to the Lantern's Glow. So far, in the Lantern's Glow, we've journeyed through some big terrain, from the birth of the universe to the formation of Earth, the rise of life, and even the great extinctions that nearly erased it all.
Yeah, it's been a cosmic tour. But now, something's changing. This episode is a pivot point, because we're not just asking what happened anymore. We're asking why we think it matters.
Right. This is where the story gets personal. Because somewhere along the way, humans changed from just surviving and started telling stories. Not just about the world around them, but about themselves, about what it meant to be here.
They started shaping reality through symbol. And that moment, when myth was born, it marks the dawn of conscious thought. This isn't just about Zeus or creation eggs or thunder gods with boundary issues. It's about the birth of the inner world.
And we need to get something straight from the start. Myths aren't just outdated fairy tales. They were the first maps of meaning, tools for navigating fear, identity, love, grief, even death.
Exactly. They spoke in images and archetypes, not algorithms. And here's the thing. As much as we pride ourselves on being modern, rational, scientific, that mythic current, it's still flowing underneath.
You can feel it. In our movies, our politics, even in the way we talk about ourselves. So today, we're going back, way back, to the place where story and self first met, to explore how myth shaped the human mind, and how early philosophy tried to carry that torch forward.
Because in this series, we're not just telling the story of the universe, we're tracing the slow awakening of a species that began in stardust, and learned to ask, why?
And this is where the light first flickered on inside.
Welcome to the dawn of thought. Let's go deeper.
So, let's roll back the clock. Way back. Before writing, before cities, before farming, we're talking early human communities, hunter-gatherers, early cultivators. What mattered most to them?
Not abstract theories, not scientific models, but origins. The beginning of things, where we came from, where the world came from. That was the sacred center of life.
And for them, remembering those origins wasn't just tradition. It was survival. It was identity. The worst thing you could do wasn't breaking a rule. It was forgetting the beginning.
Exactly. In a lot of these early cultures, from indigenous Australian dreaming to West African griot traditions, time isn't seen as a straight line. It's more circular, spiral even, always looping back to the first spark, the sacred moment of becoming.
Which means myth wasn't just story. It was a kind of time machine. You'd retell the origin not just to hear it, but to re-enter it, to reconnect with that creative pulse at the heart of everything.
Rituals, dances, chants, they weren't performances. They were memory technologies, ways of keeping the sacred present.
And in many cases, those stories weren't sweet and gentle either. There's a strong mythological pattern, especially in initiation rites, that traces everything back to a violent primal act.
Yeah. Some anthropologists connect adolescent initiation ceremonies, especially for boys, to an original mythical violence, a murder of a primal being, the breaking open of the world.
Which is intense.
It is. But the violence isn't glorified. It's sacralized. It becomes the seed of creation. The pain is what births the world.
So, procreation and destruction, life and death, They weren't separate boxes. They were woven together. Creation always costs something.
And that's a universal thread. You see it in the Norse myth of Ymir, the primordial giant whose body is carved up to create the world. You see it in Hindu cosmology, in the dismembering of Purusha, or in ancient Mesopotamia, where the goddess Tiamat is torn apart to form the heavens and earth.
Creation by sacrifice. The deep idea here is that to bring something into being, something else must end, which is weirdly profound. Like, every moment of growth is also a kind of loss.
Right. And when you link that to ritual, say, in puberty ceremonies or agricultural festivals, the community isn't just reenacting the myth, they're living it again, participating in that cycle.
Which makes forgetting the myth, forgetting the origin, not just careless. It's like cutting the cord to the divine.
Yeah. Myth was memory, cosmic memory. It's how you remembered not just who you were, but what reality was.
And that's the shift we're tracking in this episode. From remembering as a sacred act to thinking as a sacred act. From story to philosophy. From mythos to logos.
But before that shift happens, we've got to make one more descent, a very old one. Through a myth that's all about stripping away what you think you know.
Inanna?
Inanna.
Okay, so you mentioned descent. That's a big theme, isn't it?
Huge. In myths all around the world, there's this recurring shape. The hero doesn't just climb a mountain and wave a flag. They descend into caves, underworlds, the unconscious, before anything can truly begin.
Joseph Campbell called it the belly of the whale, right?
Exactly. That moment when everything familiar disappears. You're alone, vulnerable, facing something ancient, often something terrifying. And there's no map. This is the symbolic death before rebirth.
So let's talk about one of the most powerful examples. Inanna. This story is seriously intense.
Yeah. It's one of the oldest surviving myths on Earth. Sumerian. Inanna, goddess of love, war, and fertility, descends into the underworld, the realm of her sister, Ereshkigal, goddess of death and shadow.
But she doesn't just stroll in. She's summoned by a call she doesn't fully understand. And as she descends, she's stripped at each of the 7 gates. First, her crown, then her jewelry, her robes, symbols of power, status, identity, until she stands naked before death itself.
And then she dies. Her lifeless body is hung on a hook in the underworld. Total vulnerability, total surrender. It's not a punishment, it's a passage.
But she returns. She's revived, not by her own power, but through others who descend to grieve her. And when she rises, she's not the same. She brings back something more than life. She brings back knowledge, power, a deeper intimacy with death and with her own shadow.
And that pattern, descent, ordeal, return, echoes through so many traditions. Orpheus in the Greek underworld, the Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, Jesus, 3 days in the tomb.
It's not just a hero story, it's a transformation story. It's about what must die for something new to live.
Carl Jung nailed this. He said the first step toward wisdom is meeting the shadow, the parts of ourselves we usually hide or reject.
Right, and that's the real trial. Not swinging swords, but facing yourself, which, let's be honest, might be harder than slaying a hydra.
Much harder, especially before coffee.
So the underworld becomes a symbol for the unconscious, the unknown within. You go down to meet your demons, and if you survive it, you come back with a gift.
The Greeks called it the boon. In Welsh myth, Taliesin, a young boy, is swallowed by the goddess Ceridwen, digested, and then reborn as the greatest poet in the land.
Digested poetry. That's evocative.
The symbolism's rich though. Swallowed, transformed, reborn with new vision. And the vision isn't just personal. It's meant to serve the community. That's key. Descent is never just about you. It's about what you're bringing back.
Which makes you wonder, how often do we run from our own descent? From pain, crisis, stillness, the very things that could crack us open.
Exactly. And maybe the myth of Inanna reminds us of something we've forgotten. That transformation doesn't come through control. It comes through surrender, through descent.
So instead of asking, how do I avoid the descent? Maybe the better question is, what needs to die in me for something deeper to live?
And are we willing to bring it back for others?
So up to now, we've been talking about myths, big symbolic stories that shape cultures. But around the same time, maybe even earlier, something else was taking root. A different kind of journey inward.
Yeah. One without monsters or underworlds or enchanted swans, but no less profound. We're talking about the ancient wisdom traditions of India, like Vedanta and Samkhya, and the practices that would become yoga.
And this is where things really start to shift. Because these weren't just stories to remember, they were systems to live. Philosophies designed not just to explain the world, but to transform the self.
And at the heart of that transformation is one radical idea. You're not who you think you are.
Which sounds a bit like a breakup line. It's not you. It's the illusory nature of your constructed self.
Yeah, classic Upanishadic text. But seriously, these traditions said, the root of our suffering isn't just ignorance in the modern sense, like not knowing stuff. It's forgetting our true nature.
Forgetting that behind the name, the body, the personality, there's something deeper. In Vedanta, they called it Atman, the true self. And this Atman, they claimed, isn't separate from Brahman, the ultimate reality.
Which is wild. It's saying the divine is not out there. It's you, in your clearest, most stripped-back form.
But we don't see it because of something called Maya. Not stage magic, but cosmic illusion. The veil of appearances. It's what makes us mistake the flickering world of change for the deeper, still reality underneath.
So liberation, moksha, isn't about acquiring new knowledge. It's about remembering, peeling back the illusion, realizing what's always been true.
The Buddha takes this in a slightly different direction. He's often called the awakened one, and that's exactly the point. Awakening to the reality that all things are impermanent, that clinging causes suffering, and that freedom comes through insight, not belief.
And in some Buddhist texts, it's said the Buddha remembers all his past lives. But that's not about reincarnation trivia. It's a symbol of total self-awareness, of seeing beyond the illusion of a single ego, a single story.
It's like peeling away the layers of the onion and finding not tears, but peace.
And here's where it gets interesting. This journey inward wasn't passive. It wasn't about zoning out. It was a radical act, an awakening through stillness.
That stillness shows up everywhere. Think of the Buddha sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, unmoving, as temptations, fears, and illusions try to sway him. He doesn't fight, he just sees, clearly. And that changes everything.
And later thinkers, like Arnold Toynbee, picked up on this. He saw a pattern in history, civilizations facing crisis, then retreating inward. Not to escape, but to transform. To tap into something eternal and return changed.
Like the descent we talked about before, but inward this time, not downward, into silence, into presence. And from that stillness, something new begins.
So whether it's the mythical underworld or the meditative mind, the message is strangely similar. The surface world is not the whole story.
And remarkably, East and West seem to agree on that, though they take very different paths. The West went downward into dreams, shadows, and the unconscious. The East turned inward, into silence, breath, and being. Different methods, same mirror.
Carl Jung understood this. He saw the descent not as a fall, but as a a necessary encounter with the parts of ourselves we bury, the shadow, the wound, the forgotten.
Meanwhile, in the East, the Buddhist path spoke of emptiness not as despair but as liberation, not nothingness, but a space where the ego loosens and something deeper can emerge.
So one side mapped the mind like a labyrinth, the other sat at the center and watched the maze dissolve.
Either way, the message is clear. If we want to grow, we must go where the surface ends.
And maybe that's the thread running through all of it. The descent isn't just a mythic shape, it's a psychological necessity.
And truth, the kind that sets you free, it doesn't shout, it waits. So, we've talked about literal descents, underworlds, death myths, gods being dismembered, and then about inner awakening, the stillness of the Buddha, the self behind the veil. But now we're going somewhere even murkier, deeper.
Yeah, this is where the mythic and the psychological start to blur. Because there's an inner world inside all of us, and it's not all light and lotus flowers.
This is where we meet the shadow.
Carl Jung's term, the shadow, refers to the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or don't want to see. Our fear, shame, pettiness, rage, but also sometimes our power, our potential, our passion, the things we're afraid to own.
He believed that true growth doesn't come from pretending those things don't exist. It comes from meeting them and integrating them, not letting them run wild, but not exiling them either.
Jung called this the process of individuation, becoming whole. And the first step, entering the dark.
Which sounds suspiciously like those mythic descents we talked about earlier. Inanna, Orpheus, Taliesin. But now it's personal. It's not some ancient goddess. It's you, your childhood wounds, your family conditioning, your secrets. That's your underworld.
And Arnold Toynbee took a similar view, not psychologically, but historically. He noticed that civilizations often go through a period of breakdown, and the ones that survive, they don't just fight back with force, they retreat, inward. He called it withdrawal and return, a spiritual crisis that births renewal. And maybe we're living through one of those breakdowns now. A time when meaning feels scattered, and the stories we once told ourselves no longer hold.
So Toynbee saw something like the hero's journey on a civilizational level. The collective shadow, maybe?
Yes, a kind of cultural forgetting, followed by the painful rediscovery of meaning. And often, the agents of that transformation are mystics, prophets, artists, people who've gone through their own descent and come back with insight. Not politicians or power structures, but individuals, often quiet ones, carrying the ember of renewal.
Which ties into Jung's idea of the collective unconscious. This shared symbolic realm beneath our personal experiences. A kind of mythic memory bank.
Yeah, like a vast symbolic sea that we all swim in, full of archetypes, the mother, the trickster, the shadow, the hero. They live in us, but they also connect us.
It's wild to think that something as personal as your childhood fear of being left out might link you to an ancient story of exile, or abandonment, or redemption.
And that's where inner work gets tricky, because it's easy to get lost in that symbolic sea, to confuse yourself with the archetype, or to drown in your own reflection.
Jung warned about that, the danger of being swallowed by the unconscious. That's why he emphasized conscious awareness. You have to know yourself before you can really begin the descent.
And when you do descend, when you meet the shadow, it's rarely comfortable. It's often a tight squeeze, a kind of ego death. But if you can pass through that narrow passage, something opens up.
Like Inanna stripped bare, or Taliesin, digested and reborn. You come back, not as someone different, but as someone more whole.
And maybe that's the point of the descent. Not to escape reality, but to rediscover what's real within you.
And to bring something back, not just for yourself, but for the world.
The boon.
Exactly. A clearer mind, a softer heart, or maybe just the courage to walk beside someone else through their own darkness. So, after all that descent, into myth, into self, into silence, something stirs. Not a leap, but a slow turning. Across cultures, you can feel it. The world begins to tilt from mythos, the sacred stories, toward logos, the search to explain.
Yeah, logos. Reason, logic, language, system. The urge to order things, to define, to explain, to categorize.
Logos, not just logic, but the Greek for word, reason, even divine order.
And slowly, the poetic becomes doctrinal. The fluid becomes fixed.
It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes breakdown brings clarity. Take ancient Judah, when they discovered the Sefer Torah, the book of the law. It marked a turning point. Sacred truths, once passed through memory and ritual, were now etched in ink. Oral and symbolic wisdom, fixed into writing. Permanent, interpretable, controllable.
Codified, preserved. And with it, the idea of one God, Yahweh, began to rise. Not just among others, but above them. Earlier traditions were fluid, layered, interwoven with nature and myth. Now came monotheism, a powerful shift, from mystery to mandate, from ritual to rule.
But interpretation didn't stop there. In fact, the Jewish tradition embraced interpretation through something called midrash.
Midrash is beautiful. It's a way of reading sacred texts that says, this verse has layers, meanings upon meanings, even ones the original author didn't intend.
There's this wonderful story, Rabbi Akiva, interpreting a single mark on a single letter of the Torah in such a way that Moses himself wouldn't have understood it. It shows that even within structure, there was still space for creative depth.
In Islam, something similar happens, but with a different focus. The Quran brings attention to ethical action, to deen, the path. It's not about solving theology with logic puzzles. It's about how you live. Compassion, justice, humility.
And then there's Christianity, where the tension between symbol and system becomes almost a fault line. Mystery on one side, dogma on the other, the mystical body, and the bureaucratic church.
In the West, this tension intensifies, especially during the Middle Ages and the rise of scholastic philosophy. Think of Thomas Aquinas, trying to reconcile faith and reason. He argued you could reason toward God's existence, but God's essence? That was beyond language. Our concepts collapse under the weight of the infinite.
And then came the Renaissance. The scientific revolution. The cosmos cracked open. Copernicus dethrones Earth. Galileo points his telescope toward the stars. Newton writes the laws of motion. And suddenly, the world looks mechanical.
Incredibly beautiful, but also disturbingly empty. Not full of gods or spirits, but of forces, particles, a universe no longer listening, just expanding.
And some thinkers lean hard into that. De Holbach, for instance, an Enlightenment philosopher who said, basically, religion is superstition, science is truth. Case closed.
But not everyone accepted it. Some saw what was being lost, the symbolic, the sacred, the soul. And in response, they turned. Some back toward evangelical faith, others toward romanticism, or psychoanalysis, or poetry. Different ways of keeping the inner world alive.
One of the most fascinating voices was Ludwig Wittgenstein. He said, science and religion aren't two sides of the same coin. They're different language games entirely.
Right, and trying to prove God using scientific evidence, he said, was like trying to play chess with the rules of rugby. It misses the point.
And maybe that's the heart of this whole shift, from myth to logos. We didn't kill myth. We just tried to play it in the wrong register.
That brings us back to Jung, actually. He believed that even when the outer forms of religion fell away, the archetypes remained. The mythic patterns were still there, just beneath the surface, shaping how we dream, how we desire, how we suffer.
And Jung once said something surprising about Kant, the Enlightenment philosopher who basically dismantled metaphysics. Jung said Kant might have closed the door to knowing God with reason, but in doing so, he opened a door inward to who is doing the knowing.
Exactly. Suddenly it wasn't just about the cosmos or the creed, it was about the thinker, the subject, the inner lens shaping the world and shaping you.
And that shift from the world as it is to the world as it's perceived, that's going to matter a lot in what comes next.
Because as we push deeper into modernity, into evolution, psychology, artificial intelligence, we're going to keep returning to that core question. Who or what are we really?
And is there any way back to the kind of meaning we used to find in myth, without abandoning what we've learned through logos?
That's the path forward. Not myth versus reason, but something that includes both. Something we're going to explore more deeply as this series continues.
And now, something new begins to stir. Not myth, not reason, but the bridge between. Uni-Ego emerges from the shadows. So, myth gave way to reason. Logos rose. We mapped the heavens, dissected the atom, decoded the genome, and yet something lingers.
Yeah. For all our science, all our structure, we're not done with story. In fact, we're saturated in it. From Marvel films to conspiracy theories, TikToks to personal brands, we're still telling myths. We've just changed the costumes.
The ancient gods are gone, but the archetypes, they're everywhere. The hero, the savior, the trickster, the fallen angel. Scroll your feed for 5 minutes. You'll see them all.
And it's not just pop culture. Even politics is mythic now. Good versus evil. Redemption arcs. Chosen ones. We frame reality in story, even when we pretend we're being purely rational.
Which makes you wonder, did myth ever really disappear? Or did it just go underground?
Maybe what we're seeing now is a return, not to primitive myth, but to its deeper function, to remind us what can't be fully explained by data alone.
Things like love, grief, wonder, things that don't fit into a spreadsheet.
And this is where Uni-Ego begins to stir, because we're not heading back to myth. We're heading through it, carrying its insights into a world that desperately needs integration.
It was never myth versus reason, nor heart against mind, but something deeper, that cradles both, like two hemispheres of one awakening soul.
Because what we've been tracing in this episode, from descent to stillness to awakening, isn't just the story of ancient humans. It's a blueprint for us now.
We're in a moment of global crisis, ecologically, psychologically, socially. And the myths that once guided us are fragmented. The logos we built is powerful, but it's not enough on its own.
Maybe this ecological, cultural crisis is our collective underworld, a descent we didn't choose, but might still survive, if we find the courage to bring something back.
What we need now is synthesis, a way of seeing that's rational and symbolic.
That remembers the wisdom of the old stories, without being trapped by them.
That's the direction we're headed. And in the next episodes, as we explore evolution, migration, culture, religion, and the birth of written language, we'll see how the human story unfolds, not just as a discovery, but as a recovery of something we once knew.
So maybe we'll leave you with this. In a world full of noise and fragmentation, can you still hear the echoes?
And can you follow them home?
All is one.
We've gone deep today, through myth, shadow, silence, and into the space where thought begins. Myth wasn't just story, it was memory, it was meaning, and even now, in a world of data and distraction, that old current still flows beneath us. If this journey stirred something in you, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't. In the next episodes, we'll follow it forward. Through the evolution of our species, the great migrations, the rise of culture, belief, language. We're not just telling history, we're tracing what it means to be human. This is the lantern's glow, and we're just getting started. All is one.